Deleting custom entities from CRM 2011. When deleting entities, it's important to keep in mind that there's a few things that you will not be able to do. First of all, you cannot delete a system or customizable entity, which would be an entity part of the basic system solution supplied with CRM. In addition to that, any entities from a managed solution cannot be deleted either. Entities with dependencies cannot be deleted, and dependencies could include where the entity you're attempting to delete is a primary entity in a relationship, or the primary field from your entity happens to be on another entity's form. Maybe a field from your entity is included in a public view of another entity. Or finally, if your entity is referenced in a published workflow or dialog, you will not be able to delete it. So, in order to be able to delete an entity that's been embedded into a system, we probably will need to use the dependencies option to locate the places where it's used. We would then go and remove all the dependencies and then publish those changes before we will be able to delete the entity. When we delete an entity, SQL immediately drops the tables in the database, which means that all data is permanently erased before the screen comes back to you, and there's no other recovery than to restore a backup of the CRM database. Please keep that in mind. So now let's have a demonstration of deleting an entity. So in this demonstration, I've gone into the default solution and I've drilled down to a test entity that I've created. This test entity has a workflow which has been activated and also has a one-to-many relationship with test entity 2. If we were going to try and delete this, we would have to think of a couple things. First of all, is this a custom entity? Well, absolutely it's a custom entity because I created it and I know that, but it's definitely not part of any solutions. So let's just see what happens when we attempt to delete it knowing that we have dependencies in place. First of all, we need to confirm the deletion because this is a destructive process as discussed earlier. So we click OK to continue, and now it gives us a process error. It basically says that the custom entity cannot be deleted because it's currently used in one or more processes. So we need to deactivate and delete any processes that refer to this entity and then to try again. So we'll cancel this. I will go to the test workflow that I created, and first I will deactivate it. But the fact that it still exists and references an entity that we're attempting to delete will not be enough to deactivate. So the next thing that we need to do is to actually delete the workflow itself. So I'll go ahead and do that now. That being said, if we attempt to delete the entity again, we'll get a different message. First, we want to confirm the delete. And it's telling us that we cannot delete the component because there's one or more components that require it. So the debugging process, or the way that we get rid of that, is to click on Details, which will now display a form of the dependencies that we need to drill down into and get rid of. So in this particular case, I'm just going to go ahead and double-click on this one. Double-clicking on the entity now brings up the relationship in question that is causing us the problem. So what I can do is attempt to delete this relationship. However, there's a problem related to that. Because what's happened is when I created this relationship, I also put this on the form for entity 2. So what I need to do is to go out and open test entities 2's forms, which I'll click on here. First I'll cancel out of this screen for the relationship. Then I'll cancel out of the delete component, and I'll go into test entities 2's forms. I'll open the main form. And part of the problem is this is a mandatory relationship. So I need to change the relationship before I can get this off the form. Very complicated. So what we'll do is drill into Details, edit the field itself, change it from Business Required to No Constraint, and save. Now I can go back to the form. If I refresh the form, the link to test 1 is no longer mandatory, and I can drop it from the form by highlighting it and clicking the Remove button. More on customizing forms is in another segment. At this point, I need to save the form and publish it, because if I don't publish the changes, the users will still see those forms until such a time as they're published. So now any forms presented to users will no longer contain that field. Next, what I can do is go into my relationship, and here is my custom relationship, which is easy to see because of the special icon. And I can now delete this relationship. And this delete would have failed if I had not removed it from the form. So now that I'm done with that, I can go back into my dependencies and refresh. And you'll see all the dependencies are gone. I can click OK. And now I can go and delete my entity. So now I'm back into test entity. I can click the delete button, confirm the deletion, and my entity has now been removed from the schema, and at this point is being dropped from the SQL database, which will occur before the screen comes back. Notice this takes a moment or two. The delete takes place. We're presented with our solution defaults screen again. And we can take a look and see that test entity 1 is no longer in the list. And at this point, I'm also going to go ahead and do a quick delete of test entity 2, which has no dependencies that would entangle us. And now we are returned back to our default solution. And when we look at the entities that are out there, since we can only delete custom entities, I'll click on custom entities to show only those custom entities. And while the training session entity that we created earlier is still there, both test 1 and test 2 have been removed from the schema and no longer have any trace existing in the database either.